Welcome to the discussion on evolution of globalization in Indian context of cities. In the previous discussion, we discussed on how the various reasons for globalization and how they are affecting the way cities have grown, and the social, political, economical reasons why, how in the context in which globalization is happening. We discuss that. Now today we will discuss on this, how this globalization effect has happened over a period of time, and is it that globalization is a very new thing, or is it there, was it an effect which impacted the way the cities have grown throughout the civilizations. Okay, so let's go into place like this. One would wonder the strangeness of this structure, which was built in 2400 BC. Actually, this is an evidence of how globalization has been impacting the way cities are built since long time. This is a place in Lothal, where in Gujarat, where the remains were excavated of this period, where this was actually a naval dockyard which helped the ships to kind of be docked here, and it was involved in trade with very distant territories, and they were getting goods, and they were getting the various kind of artifacts, and it actually changed the way they were getting to do the trade and doing their businesses and manufacturing. So at the same time, it is important to note that the physical form of the cities were really kind of changing to accommodate this kind of structure. So this could be considered as one of the impact of globalization, where effect of globalization, how the cities are getting impacted by it. Later, through the ages, if we see, there were number of military invasions, there was number of travelers, traders coming into Indian context. They were getting in the whole lot of idea of this global ideas into our urban areas and hinterland. So these had a long term impact on how settlements were built and imagined. Okay, if you see, this is a Fatehpur Sikri is an example of how this social political systems which they got, which these different invaders they got into Indian context, got merged with the local systems. There was an opportunity to kind of integrate the systems, the systems from the distant lands of the invaders, along with the local system, local wisdom, and they could able to evolve interesting combinations in which this could be become a new system in itself. So it is very important to see that this merging of these ideas from the global and the wisdom of the local evolved new very interesting ways of evolving city building and in terms of architecture. So this went on to even evolving a very definite styles, which even got imported back by the invaders into their origin territories. Therefore, we can see the relation between the kind of invader and the invaded. The invaded people, the oppressed people, were also able to give some upward kind of an ideas into how the overall systems got evolved. So it is important to understand this, because how this system, even it coexists in how this system is even important in today's context. So, it is why we are talking about these kind of globalization across various evolution is to understand, try and compare this with how it is happening in contemporary context. So, if we see this early medieval into the systems where there were a series of new centers were built. Every invader comes and he tries to build a new center for himself, and it's a way of city building became a way of dominating a kind of invaded space. So, they used it as an opportunity to kind of impose their ideas as well. So, what were the sides of these global influences? Here we can see mostly if we imagine how the global people and their goods came into the cities of that context, was that they came through the gates. Gates were a very important locations. They were connected by formal trade routes where people got their goods and they passed through urban areas, and they came to this gates, and at the gates they were kind of examined, and then they were allowed into the inner parts of the city, which was like market areas, and also there were guest houses. So, it is these system of spaces within those cities in those areas still were kind of segregated in a way that they do not really disturb the local life in those areas. After this, the very profound influence of globalization actually happened through the colonial times. So, even though we would have seen that there were various new centers which was always been built by global invaders, when they came into Indian context like other distant lands, they always developed their own new centers and try to create their own setting rather than negotiating the pre-existed past urban settings. So, this is a system which is very important to understand how it is even relevant in today's context. So, here New Delhi is a classical example of how this system, this idea reached its peak, where the colonizers actually built a new capital city to rule this entire country, irrespective of what pre-existed very next to it. The new forms of city building got introduced, and which eventually changed the later ways of cities were perceived and built in the subcontinent. The new order outside the existing old urban area almost ignored the issues faced by it and further led to deterioration of the olden areas. It is also important to see here that why this happened. During this period in the 18th century and through the 19th century, the growth of steam ships technology, which could allow these colonizers to travel to long distances, and they were able to transport their goods to long distances. They actually traveled a lot. So, these travels to distant lands actually were capable of changing even the demographic situation of different countries. So, for example, whole lot of Europeans moved from Europe to United States, whereas we could see Chinese, lot of Chinese traveling to Americas and settling there, whereas in Southeast Asia we would see Indians being enabled to migrate and settle in Africa and even in West Indies. So, these were the conditions where the entire demographic situation of these places were also changing. Similarly, the colonizers also got in certain ideas along with them of what is their place versus what is in the colonized place. So, when they carried to distant places, they carried these ideas, they carried materials, they even carried plant species to go and plant in those areas. So, these were having this larger level impact in what would happen in the globalized areas, in new areas. the impact of this kind of huge movement into of the colonizers into urban areas of Indian context was need to be seen also with the industrialization process which went through. So, the colonizers always needed to establish the industrialization process to become a more powerful industrialized. They needed two things. They needed to enable huge resources and raw materials for their industries, and another is they needed markets where they can sell those goods, and also they needed army might to, so that they would be able to defend their territories. So, this was also the time when the idea of nation and the supported by this industrialized development also got evolved. So, there were ideas of restriction of movement also evolved over this period. But the important thing here is that how the industrialization process changed the way urban development happened in Indian context. So, this is an example of rail connectivity which was developed, and then eventually lot of industries got developed in around Hussain Sagar Lake in Hyderabad. This is an example of how this area started becoming a new urban area because of this industries being located there. Apart from the industries, it is also where this globalization actually happened. The sites of globalization in a colonial city were also ports and railways and their related godown activities, warehousing activities. So, there was a whole lot of importance given to the way they produce, where they produce their goods, where they store their goods, and how they transport it, and how it is taken further exported through the ports. So, these were very important sites of colonial impact on local the colonial global impact on local areas. So, at the same time, interesting and important to understand how the colonizers coexisted along with the colonized. So, I would like to draw the attention of this very importantly, because this has a very significant importance even in today's context. When this flow of ideas and different kind of people come in, different kind of capital come in, when they as colonizers, they came and located themselves within urban areas of Indian cities. They wanted certain kind of separation. As we see in Mumbai context, where White Town is where the colonizers lived, they located themselves away from the natives, which are the locals, the Indian locals, away from them, separated by a huge open space and public buildings. So, here in those days, it was this open space in between was seen as a way of protecting. They had this, how much ever they were able to dominate the locals, they still had this sense of insecurity for the need for having this separation, and they wanted that kind of one is they wanted the importance in the city, that they are very separate from the locals, therefore they are superior, and they want they were able to kind of impose a kind of dominating sense. And otherwise, other thing is also they wanted to keep this physical space, the green space, as a separation, so that they cannot be attacked very easily. This idea of separation in a colonial city has a very important manifestations even in other scales. If we see this interesting map, what we see in the left is a layout of an European town within the city of Calcutta, where the people, where the colonizers, they built their houses like this, where you can see the dark black patches were actually the places where they had the houses for the servants. What we see here is, you can see for each of the plot there is a system of servant spaces around this, European houses. So if you see the actual plan of the house here, the central building is the colonizer, the European who stayed here. Around you will see this whole system of servant spaces, and they were separated by open space in between. This idea of separating colonizer and the colonized within a plot has a very interesting and important thing of how this has even continues now. Swati Chattopadhyay has some interesting remarks on this. She wrote that the colonizer had as a desire for virgin native territory. However, the indispensable role played by the native in colonial life made this desire impossible to meet. Although having the natives constantly within visual range was often distasteful to the colonizers, they were unable to cope without them in the foreign lands. The great protective walls around mansions in the White Town and the huge masonry gates and iron railing enclosing their compounds, while appearing to exclude the natives and emphasize the strength and superiority over them, were really negotiated as a result of the presence of these natives as servants within their very protective spaces. So the articulation of servant spaces, as in the European houses, could not be accomplished here because of the constant fear of disease. The building of servants' quarter, though an architectural afterthought, breached the perceived impervious border between the spaces of the server and the served. So this is very important to understand how, even though they wanted to dominate and they wanted to have their exclusive spaces, still they could not do away with the locals, the actual locals. So they had to integrate them within their parcels. So I think this idea is very important, that even this has a relevance in today's impact of globalization, the globalized spaces and their relation to the locals. You will see this kind of colonial conditions where they produced new kind of public spaces, often while undermining the existing ones. So this system of creating this separation and emphasizing themselves as a different people and their old ideas and their spaces from the native has lot deep meaning inside. In this, by creating this kind of spaces and the institutions, they were trying to say their kind of dominance. At the same time, this got even got extended to an extent where they could actually do things which were very difficult and expensive. For example, in Mumbai, the expansion of Colaba, we will see that what they did is, even though it was a very difficult way of expanding their urban center, the White Town center, even though it was very expensive, they went on to reclaiming along the southward rather than the northward, because even though this huge hinterland was there on the north, still they went on to reclaiming on the south, which was more expensive and difficult, and they couldn't really do much to totally implement it. I would like to again quote here what as Swati Bhattacharya mentioned, that the whole system of how the colonizer actually took to take a position on how to say that the systems of the colonized were not so good enough or not significant enough. So you will see the systems where they marked the old cities as slum areas, and they started saying that put the idea of the problem of hygiene, and they said that the system of the way people consumed water was not hygienic enough, the way they arranged their streets and the way were not hygienic enough. So they imposed this kind of ideas onto the colonized, the natives, to say that their ideas were more superior. As Swati Bhattacharya said, closing of large drinking water storage tanks, sewers and drainage systems, and conversion of drinking water canals to sewer pipes and similar things bear testimony to colonizers' reaction to remedy of their own ideological defeat. The point is that it is actually they couldn't understand the local systems. Therefore, they took on this dominating path to remedify their defeat to the not able to understanding the local system. If we see the next phase of after the globalizers left, the colonizers left, then the Indian there was a very distinct change in the way globalization was perceived, because of the colonized, the new government came up after the colonizers left. They thought that in the country need to be protected, so there was a whole lot of protective measures were taken to there were the suspective look of the global traders were very seen as an important thing. There were substituting industries were developed against imports, and infant industry protections were protected, and then there was a conscious attempt to go towards balanced growth and self-sufficiency within the country. So this entire change in paradigm after the colonization changed the way the globalization happened in Indian cities during this period. So what happened is that in the post-democratic cities, though most of the urban areas, they inherited the colonial setup onto their conditions, still they wanted to kind of work around it to make that it is democratic. The colonized city has to be democratized. So there was this whole lot of system of creating public amenities and institutions and systems, so that it will become a kind of providing the facilities for the locals. There was a whole lot of new administrative cities and a whole lot of industrial cities were developed during this period. Those were looking at an opportunity to provide a leveled platform for the newly independent nation and the people to provide jobs. So we need to if as a city, as a process, if we see here how the same colonized cities started becoming democratic city. So there were conscious efforts to convert the city to by doing interventions such as state-led interventions, such as developing of institutions and developing of health facilities, education, then very clear planning of recreation areas, and nation building became a project in itself. So architecture also played a very important role in this nation building project of evolving a certain sense of pride in the citizens. So during this period, planning and designing of urban systems, urban areas became a government activity. That made a kind of very distinct difference in the way the cities evolved in the later period. Since the government took very conscious steps of providing infrastructure and housing and other things, at the same time government thought that we need to also build cities as a part of the nation building project, to say that the nation has arrived. So therefore, there is a whole lot of borrowed ideas came into the way of city building. Building of Chandigarh is an excellent example of how new borrowed ideal city was seen as an project to improve or so called elevate the position of a local of the long colonized situation. So here what happened is that the government wanted to get in this pure, I mean the high level of modernism here, which is at par with their colonizers who have just left. So the struggle to become at par with the Westerners, who were the colonizers just back, could be seen or argued as a way of even continuing of the global ideas influencing Indian cities. So even though the colonizers have left, still their ideas, their ways of perceiving cities and the way of building cities had a very profound impact on the ways even cities were built even after that. So the city building considers a tool to bring about a cultural change which would establish oneself at par with that of the West and the past colonizers. The continuation, so this is a continuation of deep impact of global ideas in city building. So at the same time, while we say that the city building took kind of a more balanced growth and a more kind of planned development and planned providing for everybody, providing for equal importance for everybody. At the same time, there were also huge disparity between in our urban areas. So this is a very important thing to also understand, that while planning was happening, at the same time the growth of informal in Indian context was also growing in a large system. As Nalini Sundar very interestingly said, she said that development of slums was then not a violation of the plan, it was an essential accompaniment to it. It is a Siamese twin. So therefore, though the nation building project was not yet complete, this system of could not be completed through this formal means of building this planning and building. At the same time, there was this indigenous ways of how people they came into urban areas, and you know how they organized themselves in these informal settlements. So it is I think this is something which is even continuing in today's context, in seeing how this planned development, planned interventions versus this organic and the organic systems of growth of cities, which is more based on the need and from this context. So we need to see this also in the social sense of the city, where the country got independent, and there is a whole lot of new confidence in people. They were migrating to, whole lot of people were migrating to urban areas, and whereas the state was not in that able to develop the formal system of providing services so fast enough that they could kind of cope up with this migration process. I think this is something which is even continuing in today's context. Then happened the post-liberalization city, where what happened in the 1990s is that the opening of the Indian economy to the global investments and influences. So I would argue that while the nation building project was not yet complete, still the country was trying to go through this protective measures of the economy, and the whole lot of the urban system was still very informal. The way the jobs were provided and urban spaces were developed were quite informal. Again, this cycle of this globalization becomes takes the front seat, where influencing, opening the country for urban influence, for global influence, actually impacts the way the urban development happened after that. It's a very important to see that it is also a time when a whole lot of this information technology got opened up, and because of the information technology, it was possible for the local to be involved in the global activities by being placed in the local areas. And it was also a global process where this actually impacted the way the cities were built throughout the world, especially in Indian context, where the kind of homogenization happened of the local areas with that of the global cities which are located in far distances. So with that, in the next session we will discuss more in detail about what is the characteristics of this post-liberalization city, and how then the next we will also discuss how the global sites got located within this post-liberalization city and their characteristics. So it was here I would like to summarize. It is very important to understand how this evolution of globalization happened through the process, and this will help us to understand how it is to compare with the existing context. Thank you.